Hello, this is Robert Meade, and I have an amazing interview coming up. A gentleman that I've known now for over 3 years. He is a manifesting machine, really. He's had an amazing life. He's had tremendous experiences. He's had his own YouTube channel, podcast. He's very involved in his community and in helping others. Dave Whitley, welcome.
Thanks for having me on, Robert. It's great to be here.
Well, Dave, a lot of our viewers might be meeting you for the first time. Some will recognize you, of course, because of the books you've been involved with and your previous work in media and in coaching. But tell us just real quick your background. You can start with the basic stuff. Where are you in the United States? Of course, I'm in the Philippines, and we're doing this like about a 14-hour difference right now. It's my
Yeah,
morning
we're
and
doing it
your
early
evening.
morning and late at night. Yep.
Exactly. So tell us about where you live right now, the city and state and area, and tell us a little bit about yourself. And I understand you're a father too.
I am indeed. I am near Nashville, Tennessee. I was born in Nashville, which is a rare thing to find people that are born here that still live here these days. Most of the people here moved in from other places. Lived in Tennessee pretty much all my life. I'm about a half an hour south of downtown Nashville. So grew up about an hour south of where I am now. Short version of my story is when I was a little kid, I was overweight and I had a terrible stutter, and I wanted to be a superhero and didn't know how to do it. And then like I would imagine myself like having superhuman powers, right? And then one fateful night, Lou Ferrigno comes on TV playing the Hulk. And you have to understand, this was before Arnold Schwarzenegger was known, right? And Ferrigno's TV show preceded Arnold's movie success. Arnold had made a couple of movies, but that was the first time that I had ever seen a man who was that big and that muscular and looked like the Hulk. It was just mind blowing, because now it's everywhere. Bodybuilders that's a whole culture and it's mainstream and all that. But back then there was nothing else like it. And I didn't know how to get that way, but eventually I found out that guys got big and strong like that by lifting weights. And so I got a set of weights for Christmas when I was a kid, started lifting weights, and that started a lifelong journey with strength for me, which I didn't put it together until many years later, that me imagining that that's how I wanted to be would lead me to where I wound up, which is I became a professional performing strongman and speaker. So it's interesting to me looking back on it, not knowing that my imagination was at play even then, because I was imagining myself having these superhuman powers. Well, I developed literally superhuman strength, because super means over, above, or beyond what is normal, and human is the condition that we have right now. So strength above normal is how I kind of quantify that. And I also was horrified to get up and speak in front of the class when I was a kid. It was book report day, it was unnerving, anxiety ridden, because I would get bullied, picked on, made fun of, all that sort of stuff. Then I become a professional speaker and I become a professional coach in the strength realm, where I'm standing in front of groups of people, teaching things and communicating with people. So pretty interesting that it played out that way. Quick little bit about what it means to be a performing strongman. When I say strongman, a lot of people immediately think of the competitive aspect of it, which is a sport. It's guys, they get together, they do these various different events, and they see who can lift the most weight or carry the most weight the greatest distance or whatever. Fantastic sport. I love watching it. That's not what I do. What I do has its roots in performance art and in vaudeville, and back when there was a period of time when there was no internet, obviously, there was no television, and very few homes even had radio, so that if you wanted to get some entertainment in your life, you had to go out and see live shows. And vaudeville was the thing at the time, which was a variety type thing. So the strongmen of that era would share the stage with all other sorts of entertainers, comedians, singers, dancers, magicians, all that sort of stuff. But like one of the classic feats of strength that we would do, or that they would do back then, is they would take a deck of cards. You can see it.
Yes, absolutely.
Altered, unaffected. Yeah. Um,
Very cool.
the
I love
deck,
a
so that they know that
visual.
I'm not going.
Great. Excellent.
Yes. So I've not gone and cut the cards in any way. They mostly right here, if I can get the camera angle and the lighting just right, when I twist it, it starts to come apart, and I just go ahead and rip it the rest of the way, right? Now, that requires practice, that requires a certain amount of physical strength, but being able to do any of these feats of strength requires being able to see it in your mind first. And that was what put me on the path of understanding how the imagination works. My mentor, a man named Dennis Rogers, who's a grandmaster strongman, said something when I first started doing feats of strength. He said, you must remove all fear and doubt and limitation from your mind, because your mind controls your body. And he was speaking in terms of doing physical feats, because there's an element of fear that can come into play and an element of pain that can come into play with some of these feats. Well, I put that to use, started getting good at feats, and realized this doesn't just apply to ripping decks of cards or bending steel or whatever else I might be doing. This idea that the mind controls the body is universal. And it's universal in the sense that body doesn't mean just the meat suit that my spirit is walking around having this experience in. Body is everything that I'm experiencing in the physical 3D world. And so the more I started to study and understand how the mind works, it led me to guys like Napoleon Hill and Wallace Wattles, and eventually to Bob Proctor, and to my friend Joe Vitale, which Joe Vitale was the one who turned me on to the guy who is my number one favorite of all of the mystics and teachers and whatever label you want to slap on that. And that's, of course, Neville Goddard. So
Okay, well,
that
you know
is,
what? I'd like to just
yeah,
zoom in on that for a minute, because that,
yeah,
as you know, that's how we have our commonality. Originally, we met on Neville Goddard Mystic Teaching Facebook site, which I
yep,
recommend all of our viewers. If you haven't subscribed to that Facebook, you definitely should. It's exploding, and it really goes deep into manifestation and Neville Goddard's mind and teachings. And you touched on something earlier I'd like you to bring back into conversation, and you can tie that right
sure.
in with what you're saying, is that even as a young child, you began to use your imagination. Like you say, you were not a strong man at that time, but you watched the show that I watched too, the Hulk with Lou Ferrigno. That's amazing. So what that means is both of us are we have some years behind us.
Yes.
But in using your imagination, you took it to another level, because you tied in the physics of it with your body, and actually with your mind in accomplishing other goals besides strength goals. And then you say you did some interviewing and some work with Dave Vitale. Yeah, I understand.
Joe Vitale. Joe
Joe Vitale.
Vitale.
I'm sorry, Joe
Yeah.
Vitale.
Yeah. Joe was in the movie The Secret. That was my first exposure to him. And I had listened to some of his stuff, seen some of his videos, and knew who he was. Hadn't dived deep into his stuff, but he reached out to me on Facebook and Facebook Messenger several years ago, and told me that he enjoyed what I was doing in terms of feats of strength. And at first I thought this is somebody pretending to be Joe or whatever, but no, it was actually him. And it turned out that we were doing, Dennis Rogers and I were doing a workshop for Old Time Strongman University in Austin, Texas was it 2016? I thought that sounds right. And maybe it's 2015, somewhere around in there, several years ago. Anyway, Joe lived at the time on the outskirts of Austin, Texas. And so he comes to the workshop, and he came there and picked up on the feats very quickly, because he was able to use his mind to see the end result and then get his body to follow along with it. So he picked up on it very quickly. We became friends, and I went down and visited him at his home, and we had this period of several days where the stuff that I was very good at, he wanted to learn, and the stuff that he was very good at, I wanted to learn. So we went kind of back and forth.
Well, that's a
And
great collaboration with
yeah,
somebody as awesome as him. You know,
yeah,
I just a quick note. I also was introduced that way through the secret to those individuals, and I had the privilege of meeting several of them, particularly Bob Proctor, who I met and did a coaching 5-day seminar with him on becoming a coach for him, and then I did that 13-month, year-long coaching thing from Bob Proctor, and so. Amazing. These guys are absolutely amazing. So you did this with him. You got the best of him, and he got the best of you. Now,
yeah.
you actually he wrote a forward to your book, I understand, and maybe you could
Yeah,
show the book too that you mentioned earlier. You
yeah,
have that
sure,
handy?
sure. I
Because
do. I have the
I'm going
book.
to leave that in a link. So friends, yeah, right there. It's just,
It's called
yeah, getting
Superhuman
clear because
You,
of your
and
blurred background. So,
yeah,
Superhuman You. Okay, we're going to make sure
yeah.
that they can order that. And what's the easiest way for them to order that book?
If you are in the continental U.S. or the contiguous U.S., anywhere except for Alaska and Hawaii, go to superhumanyobook.com and I'll send it to you. All I ask is that you pay shipping and handling because I've got to cover my costs on that. Otherwise, it's available on Amazon and on lulu.com.
Okay, so
But the
superhumanbooks.com, and they can also get it.
superhumanyobook.com.
Okay, and
And
then they
I'll
can also get that on Amazon and other outlets online. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, and lulu.com. And I'll make sure that you get the links to put in the show notes on that. The way the book came about though is that weekend, Joe started talking to me about what I wanted to do as a strongman and where I was taking it as a speaker and all that sort of stuff. And he said, "You should write a book." And I'm like, "Yeah, I probably should. Well, have you ever thought about writing one?" I'm like, "Yeah." Well, what would be in it? And I started just kind of naming off the stuff. And then he said something that was really, really interesting. And he said, "When are you going to send me the rough draft?" And looking back on it, I realized that took it from this vague conceptual idea to this is
Mm-hmm.
an actual process that is
Mm-hmm.
happening. And that started me living in the end, right? I'm like, okay, when could I get this done? And so like I'm imagining myself sending it to him. And I said, I don't know, middle of February. This was in December. So I gave myself like 2.5 solid months. And he reaches across the table and says, "I look forward to reading it," and shakes my hand. And before I realize it, I'm shaking his hand. I'm like, well, shit, I just agreed to write a book. And I sent him the rough draft
Wow.
on the day that I said I would, and a month later I had a hard copy in my hand. And
Wow.
then
So that's
and
where
he
really
wrote the
you got
forward.
motivated, you took it into action. And
Yeah,
that's absolutely amazing. So there's so many directions we can go. What I wanted to do is if you can maybe share some thoughts of what you think are priorities for my viewers. So a lot of our viewers, some of them have experience in manifesting and using their imagination. Some have some background with some of the authors you talked about. And certainly I'm interested in all those authors you mentioned, particularly Neville Goddard. But if they're really kind of just really getting serious about this or want to transform their lives, what are some keys that you found that they can begin to utilize?
I'll give you two thoughts on that. Um, the first one is the value of understanding how to vividly enter into a scene in your own mind, in your own imagination. There was a particular feat of strength that I did that set me up for the fullest understanding of this that I could possibly have. And that was it's the feat is called the Iron Mind Red Nail. And that's not important, but it's among steel benders, it's an elite level. You bend this particular piece of steel under these very specific conditions, you get your name put on a list of about, it's probably up to about 115, 120 people now. I did this a little over 11 years ago and, or a little over 10 years ago. And when I was practicing for it, I was doing all the physical training, but I was also getting very into the visualization and the mental rehearsal aspect of it. And two different occasions when I was just like sitting on my couch, laid back, very relaxed, very in the moment of this scene that I had created, I knocked myself out of my relaxed, meditative state akin to sleep state because I started sneezing. And the reason that I started sneezing is in the scene, I would chalk my hands up and I would rub them together and clap them, and this cloud of chalk dust would come up. And that imaginary chalk dust on two separate occasions of me practicing the scene in my mind made my body start sneezing. So that really drove home the point that the the imagination and the subconscious and the body, they don't know the difference between what's happening in 3D and what's vividly imagined, with what Neville would call sensory vividness, that spiritual sensation. So that's the first thing. Get really, really good at developing that skill where all five of your physical senses plus your sense of proprioception, which is where you are in time and space, and your
Hmm.
sense of interoception, which is the ability to like feel the inside of your lungs when you breathe, or to sense that your heart is beating. It's or like, you know, oh, my stomach feels kind of funny. That's interoception. It's beyond the five, or it's in
So let me
addition to the
understand
five
that,
physical
Dave.
senses.
So what you're
Yeah.
saying is, perhaps in their meditation, they can tie that physical and imaginary state together with their
Yes.
breathing. Because
Yes.
I love to give practical advice, and you're giving practical advice. What is a process that you go through that helps you drop into vividly seeing those things and physically feeling them in the same time as you drop into that, that alpha theta meditation?
That's the trick, right? Is how do you imagine doing something that you've never done before because you don't have a reference point?
Yeah,
What I
yeah,
found
exactly.
works, what I found works very, very well is something that I call recall and replace. So let's say that you it you want to achieve a particular thing, right? But and let's say it's money. Like let's say that you want a certain sum of money. Well, everyone has received money or has received a gift of some sort at some point in their life, and they felt a particular way then. You can remember that moment of receiving something that was a large sum of money to you or a very special gift to you, and how that felt at the moment that you received it. And you kind of relax and breathe deeply and go into the state remembering that situation. And then once you're in your relaxed state and you're kind of detached from your body, like can't really feel your toes anymore, sort of stuff, you let the details of that scene, of the memory, fade away, and then you replace it with whatever scene you want to accomplish in the future that has a similar feeling. So you're taking an old feeling from a memory that you're familiar with, and you're putting it onto a new, yet to be experienced memory that's coming from the future. And so you're able to bridge the gap that way. And I find that that's very beneficial for me to get in the state of something that I'm not familiar with doing already, is by drawing on my own previous experience.
I love that, Dave. I really want them to make sure they get that clear because if I hear you correctly, what you're doing is by bringing in that past memory, memories have emotions and feelings with them, and you can visualize something that actually happened. So it's something that they actually experienced or remember that was an experience for them. That brings them back into that mental state and that emotion. And when they get into that, where they can actually feel and see that previous event, that already puts them in a spirit, mood, and attitude of then being able to connect with the dream or desire that they do want. Would that be
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Exactly. That's it. Exactly. It's recall the memory and then replace the memory with the future vision.
Excellent. I have another question for you. I just have so many questions, and we're going to try to cover as much as possible.
Sure.
Do you have any daily or weekly or general habits that you find help you stay on track? So we've got people out there that they're trying to develop habits, they're trying to decide how to live a better life. And really, in my experience, everything is habit, bad and good. So in developing good habits, what are some of the things that you do on a regular basis that you find help keep you in your mindset that you want to be in?
Something that I do, and I do it every day, is whatever particular thing that I want to accomplish or achieve or manifest, however you want to describe it, is I will write it out in great, great detail in a journal. And then I will take whatever I wrote out and condense it down into one or maybe two sentences, so that what I wrote, say 4 or 5 pages of, is now the same feeling is evoked by 3 or 4 sentences on a 3x5 card. And I carry that card around and I'll read it periodically, like as often as I can. And I got that from Bob Proctor. You mentioned, and that was the second thing. I don't want to not say this. That was the second thing that I wanted to say earlier. I went through that same 13-month Bob Proctor coaching program
I
that you
was
were
going to
talking
say
about.
we're on the same wavelength because I believe the same way and I do the same thing. Bob Proctor firmly believed, as did Napoleon Hill, that if you don't write it down, it's not going to happen. And so I do the same thing in my life. And my best manifestations of changing my life have all been first things that I wrote down, even in detail of what I wanted to see happen. And then, as you say, condense it down and even put it on a card and even carry the card with you. I love
Well,
that.
the last part about that card, though, is I will carry it loose in my pocket. And I got this also from Bob Proctor, that it just the act of sticking my hand in my pocket and touching that card triggers the feeling.
Boom.
It, yeah, it triggers it. And
Yeah.
so, um, when that happens, I can even unintentionally slip back into the state if I've slipped out of it just by sticking my hand in my pocket and be like, oh yeah. So it's a reminder at that point. So the main thing, practice with your imagination, right? And a good usable thing that you can do right now is, let's say you're sitting on your couch watching this on your phone and you decide you want to get up and, you know, you're thirsty, you want some water. Before you get up and go get the water, set the phone down, close your eyes, and mentally rehearse getting up, going into the kitchen, pouring a glass of water, feel it, taste it, feel it going down your throat, and then imagine yourself going back and sitting back down on the couch, and then immediately get up and go do it. And you're tying an imaginal act to a 3D act when you do that. And above all else, I would say that there's no reason that anyone has to spend the time and the effort of doing trial and error with this stuff when there's so many other people who have done the trial and error for you. Get a coach. You want results, get a coach. I mean, if you want to learn how to fly an airplane, drive a car, be a doctor, anything like that, you would go find someone who's done this before and learn what they learn. You wouldn't try to figure out open heart surgery on your own. This is not just open heart surgery. This is bigger than that. This
And you
is
know
the universe.
something, I mean, here we are, we're both coaches, and both of us took intense coaching ourselves and consulted great coaches ourselves in person, actually with them, and then through books. And these are exactly, these are highlights. I love this because this is so much in harmony with what I teach and what I believe. Dave, it has been an absolute honor having you with us. I can see right now we're going to have to do a part 2 at some point because there's a lot left on the table. I know you're into so many other things with Wim Hof and the ice baths and breathing. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about my experience too. We're not going to go there, but I also bent the bar, walked on coals. I did a lot of those things, learning to use my power of my mind years ago at some events that I attended. And so these are not pie in the sky things. These are actual things that we can use now. Some of those key things you mentioned, I'm going to make sure I highlight them, and so that they can begin to practice using their imaginations vividly and manifesting their best lives. Dave, it's been an honor, sir.
Thank you so much.
Take care.